running as quiet and silent, making a very small presence, and then having obviously having support forces, without going into too much detail, available. I can say that, but it's just small unit tactics in very noisy environments, going against an enemy that basically knows every inch of the ground they've lived on for the last 7 months, maybe for the last 7 years if it hasn't been detected. So they know what's out of sync. They know what sound. They know how sound carries off the ridge if an animal breaks a branch or a person breaks a branch. It's not easy.
Can you walk us through some of the early operations that you guys saw and, kind of how it really started to differentiate itself as its own task force, unique unit and, more specialized or better equipped kind of than some of those initial engagements that we had earlier gone through?
Yeah. It's another really great question. And every time we had an injury, and the one being in 2005, on August 5th, 2005, I often say that that's a day that, I'll never forget. Every year when that day hits, it's kind of a solemn day, a reflective day. Mm-hmm. I usually find myself not around a lot of other people. I find myself in the woods somewhere. If I happen to be in California, most likely Montana that time of year, it's just, I'll never forget every minute, every second, how visceral that incident was, because it was the first time I had been in a gunfight. More importantly, it was the first time we'd ever had somebody hurt, happened to be my young partner. And the helplessness of knowing that if he doesn't get rescued soon, there's nothing more we can do. He's going to die of blood loss, go into shock, and he was starting to show those signs, but it's just his tough grit and will kept him alive.
He's a hell of a warrior.
He is a hell of a warrior, man, and amazing. And I just, one of my heroes for sure. And my sheriff's partners too, that had only worked with him for that day for the first time, were just amazed by him. And they felt as shattered and potentially helpless if we didn't get some help. And by the good graces and prodding and pushing and calling dispatchers to tell them what we really needed and telling them, it's clear here. Mm-hmm. It's safe to come in. I mean, we had part of our hill secured and the rest of that hill wasn't secured, and a lot of airships won't come into a hot zone at all. And we said, it's as clear as it's going to get. It's secure. And a CAL FIRE Huey pilot that his battalion chief decided to buck the system and say, we're not letting that kid sit out there any longer. Send the bird in. So everything from air assets of who you work with, the military. We hadn't worked with PAFOC teams ourselves yet. And all the counter-drug guys and the Air Force said, hey, if you're doing a mission, we'll spool up a Black Hawk. We'll have a prep team ready. We're 30 minutes max to getting anywhere you're going to operate. Max. That's as long as it's going to take us, if that. Highway patrol, we found a couple of different resources that we could count on. So our air support got exponentially better as the missions developed and we got greenlit. That was happening before we had our full-time team. But if we were working with the sheriffs, everybody learned from that incident because there were so many things we just hadn't experienced. Mm-hmm. You can't take a life flight helicopter that's an ambulance with a blade and land it in a jungle-like canopy. You're going to have to long lines people in and out. We're going to have to short haul in, stabo in as we call it, or out. All those were learning lessons. When we came together, we had already trained in April, the year of the pilot program, just to kind of formalize things that we'd already been doing. Mm-hmm. And we formalized it with that same sheriff's department. So Sergeant John Spagnola, who's my brother in arms, he's retired now. And John was actually a basic sniper school student in 2001 with me and Marcos. We were all students together in his own agency, and he would later lead that sniper team, later lead Sierra team. And he and I would develop the revised basic and advanced sniper school curriculum. But we were students together. It went back that far. So he brought the full asset of the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office, their tier 1 firing range and training center that the Best of the West national SWAT competition used to be held at, and said, okay, you guys are going to do training. We'll train with you, set up the grow site scenarios, sniper pad, whatever. And so we were working with them as we developed our team. So we were right out of the gate doing missions without thinking about it. Mm-hmm. But you had to strategize how many missions we could pull off in a week safely without running ourselves into the ground, without pulling, my guys from the very northern tip of California down to, say, Southern California, and then back to Central California. And of course, a team of that level, you're training throughout the month. Snipers have to train independently of entry. Canines are training, independently of entry assault. But we all have to work together, and we're all essentially MET team members that can do the assault job. We can't all handle a canine directly, but if we have to, because our canine handler goes down, we will be able to handle that dog. We will be trained in bringing that dog off of a bite, caring for that dog. Tactical medicine. Tactical medicine had to be a complete advancement from what we didn't have in 05. So as much as tactical units get the technology and they get the firearms training and, the best mousetrap for a carbine and the best night vision and the best optic and excuse me, things like that, our trauma medicine had to be like massively improved. Mm-hmm. And now it's 2013. A lot's happened in the GWAT. A lot's happened with trauma protocol. A lot's happened with anticoagulants. And now it's dirty tourniquets. It's sucking chest wounds. It's leg breaks. It's doing trauma medicine to canines that might be stabbed or shot, because they honestly were in more danger than we were when we were running them every day. Canine Phoebe, Reed, a female Belgian Malinois in California that had 116 apprehension bites on cartel gunmen, had another almost 900 arrests where she didn't have to bite, guys that either gave up, right, or they just said, I have heard the dog. Stranded hikers, found murder weapons, lost children. But when I told Mike Ritland that story, when we got to know each other right after I retired, he goes, whoa, what? You have a Belgian Mal in California. How can you even have a team like this in California? How does a dog get that many bites? He goes, I have Team 6 guys that have had dogs for a career that don't have that many bites, on Taliban. I go, Mike, she was 3 years, she was 3 years of a hot mess, man. And it was her handler who's a 1 in a million and she's a 1 in a million dog. And they had to kind of, learn by growing pains, because they're not your traditional sheriff's rural dog, because they're going into these hot backcountry, super jungle-like, 8-10 miles sometimes as far into the backcountry. And yet she has to be an urban dog too, like a police dog. And at that point, it was like, okay, when you're on the show, we got to talk about this. And it was just a great thing, because there's a SEAL canine expert, right? Yeah. Mike's a great guy, great friend, and what he's done with Tricos and Team Dog is just fantastic. But
I need to get him on the show to train my dog, because my dog's an idiot. You get to meet him today. I'll bring him after.
Yeah.
I would have asked him.
Mike, if you're listening, brother, come on. Reed's awesome. Yeah. If you can get, and you're not, and you guys are both Texas guys. So that's pretty cool. But that was a game changer, is having dogs like that, dogs that were so dedicated and knowing how to work our tactics around the dogs. What was unique to us that isn't always necessarily the situation when you have a canine handler that's coming and going and they're not with your unit all the time is, do you have enough trust in the dog and the dog handler? And can the dog handler and the dog trust the fellow operational crew? Mm-hmm. We did everything around the dog. So our primary thing was, you got to do things around the dog. The dog has to be in a position where she can detect, or he can detect and apprehend, but still have protection around it. Because 2017, 2018, toward the middle of my MET tenure, as I was getting close to retirement, we had 3 or 4 federal dogs that had been targeted, stabbed, some fatally, that did not survive. And the cartels were getting so savvy to the fact that these dogs were coming in and just wrecking their operations. Not only were they taking out their growers, not fatally, but they were injured and they were hurt. You're going to feel the pain from a dog bite. You're not going to die, but you're going to be out of commission for a while. More importantly to the cartels is, I just lost 30, 40 million on that super grow. And, some of my tier 1 grower, gunmen, whatever, they may not be the same after that dog bite, or they're going to be impaired for a while. And so they started to develop tactics where they'd basically suck the dog in. They'd have a firearm that we might see, but they'd have a fixed blade knife or a sharpened like deer bone to be like almost like an ice pick, and then taped up for a handle, almost like a prison shank. We've seen all kinds of different versions, but they would basically take the dog bite and then pull that fixed blade and go right for the jugular. And, you know, they took out some dogs. And I've got a picture of one of our federal dogs that is just out of surgery with all those stitches. And that canine is now retired. I'm not sure if, I think Canine Ice is still alive, but he's retired. He ran side by side with Phoebe in the heyday, you know, kind of mini me. It was great. But working apprehension tactics around the dog, working in very small units where the trails are real tight. Vietnam guys that did anything behind lines, MARSOC, any of that, MACV, you know, some of those groups. You hear the stories, they're starting to come out. Some of the operating environments we worked were a lot like that. It was 4 of us and a dog, and running as quiet and silent, making a very small presence, and then having obviously having support forces without going into too much detail, available. I can say that, but, it's just small unit tactics in very noisy environments, going against an enemy that basically knows every inch of the ground they've lived on for the last 7 months, maybe for the last 7 years, if it hasn't been detected. So they know what's out of sync. They know what sound. They know how sound carries off the ridge if an animal breaks a branch or a person breaks a branch. It's not easy, but that also makes the hunt that much more rewarding when you actually catch those guys and creep right up on them and you take them, without having to go to gunfire.